Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you for the kind invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to see Leeds, which I didn't know as well before, although I had visited before. It's also a challenge because I know that the audience is very varied. We have institutional actors, those who are involved in quality assurance on a daily basis, those who try not to be involved as much as possible, those who are not from institutions, those who are Europeans or European-minded, and those who are not European-minded, though Europeans, and those who are not European at all. So I hope this will give something still to a bit of everybody, although I fear it might be a repetition for those of you who know it very well already. And I try also to avoid the kind of terrible European acronym jargon with all of E, everything beginning with an E. There is some of that in there, but we'll try to go through that hopefully relatively smoothly. Just check my clock. So I have about 20 minutes to tell you everything about the European context for quality assurance. I try to give a couple of historical glimpses because I think it's important to understand why quality assurance is important and why there is a European framework. For many things, we don't have a European framework. For internationalization, for example, there isn't a consolidated framework. There might be some kind of similar ways of people doing things, but for quality assurance, there is actually a framework that has been approved of and accepted and adopted by ministers of higher education in 47, now maybe 48 countries. Then what are the principles for quality assurance in Europe? The ESG, that's the first interesting acronym, the European Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance, which is the basic document. It's still not very nicely printed because it has just been approved in the revised version, so it's still a kind of a printout, but I wouldn't go anywhere without this, obviously. So I said there was the revision, so I'll have a little look at what has changed. It's not so interesting for those who don't know how it was before, but it gives you an idea of what are the requirements and what are the hot topics now, and some of the main features of quality assurance in Europe. So quality assurance has been one of the action lines of this ministerial process called the Bologna process since the very beginning in 1999. It's an intergovernmental process of voluntary convergence. We hate the word harmonization. It's a red flag to everybody. We don't try to harmonize, but try to find a way so that we can understand what each other is doing. So, sorry, wrong word. It's, like I said, 48 countries now with the accession of Belarus in May in the ministerial conference. And in the biggest step for quality assurance in the Bologna process was in 2005 with the adoption of the European Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance in the first version. And what's interesting and important for us and very particular for the European context, that while that is, it's a ministerial process, it's a intergovernmental process, the European Standards and Guidelines were created by the stakeholder organizations. So there is another buzz acronym for you, the E4 group, which is composed of the Association of the Students, the Association of the Universities, and other higher education institutions, and of the ENQA, so the quality assurance agencies. And these standards were adopted in 2005, 10 years, like you said. It's a very long time. It's a very long time in higher education, and a lot of things have changed since then, and thus also the need to revise the European Standards and Guidelines. But in between, in 2008, the European Quality Assurance Register, ECAR, was set up, and that's in a way a list of those agencies that have shown that they comply with the European Standards and Guidelines. And it's the only body that has come out of the Bologna process so far. So it's the baby of the Bologna process. But it was established by the stakeholders, and we are members of the executive board of this body. But then in 2012, there was a decision, the ESG should be revised because a lot had happened already then. There were also some inconsistencies in the document in the terms of terminology, structure. Not everything was crystal clear. I think it still isn't, everything isn't crystal clear, but it's better. For example, the qualifications frameworks for the European higher education area were also developed running up to 2005. So the two tools don't make any reference to each other because they were adopted at the same moment. So these kind of things had to be taken into account in the revised version. And again, the revision was undertaken by stakeholders, but we added a little bit bigger group. So we also involved the Business Europe, which represents obviously the employers, Education International, which is the trade unions of teachers or university lecturers, and ECAR, the register, because they are the main safe guardians of the European standards and guidelines. And this revised version was approved by the ministers now in May. These are the main principles, 4 main principles that are listed in the revised European standards and guidelines for quality assurance in Europe. When you look at the first one, it's very important. It might not sound so special in the UK context because you have degree awarding institutions, very autonomous, but it's not so for very many European countries. So the higher education institutions have primary responsibility for the quality of the provision, that's quite obvious, but also for its assurance. So quality assurance starts and has its main focus at the institutional level. Of course, in Europe, we like the word diversity. We are all for diversity. It creates a lot of complications. It would be easier to have a harmonized system and not allow for so much diversity. But also the quality assurance has to respond to that diversity. We try to respect and accept that. And there is, of course, diversity of institutions, diversity of higher education systems, of programs, but also of agencies I've added there. So this means that all of these can have policies and processes for activities that go beyond the scope of the European standards and guidelines. And also when these different bodies, entities decide how they implement the European standards and guidelines, they have to take into account their respective contexts, the institutional mission, for example, the national context, the legal limitations that there are, and so on. The third principle is that quality assurance supports the development of a quality culture. Often heard criticism is that quality assurance is all about processes, it's very bureaucratic, nobody likes it, and it doesn't promote a good attitude or positive attitude towards quality assurance. And now we are really trying to work so that quality assurance could be seen through this quality culture, building up of a quality culture as a useful tool for the teacher, for department, for school, for the institution, for the national context, as a useful tool to enhance quality and have an outsider view also on your own quality. And very important in European context is the involvement of stakeholders. It's quite clear from the fact that the European standards and guidelines were created by the stakeholders. And quality assurance should take into account the expectations of all the different stakeholder groups and the society at large. How we will do that, we don't really know quite yet, but we hope that we'll get some ideas from the different entities, institutions, national agencies, and so on. Now, these are not listed as principles in the European standards and guidelines, but they are kind of underlying ideas or concepts that still determine and come out from the European standards and guidelines. One is that the independence of quality assurance agencies. So actually it's written incorrectly. I said not parts of the ministry, but let's say not dependent on the ministry would be the correct wording. This is also very typical for today's Europe. It wasn't so 10 years ago, and for some countries it still isn't like that. But we consider that autonomous institutions need to have as counterpart independent quality assurance agencies. One of the purposes of quality assurance is, of course, to support trust. And this is very important for internationalization, for international partnerships, for mobility, for recognition of degrees. If you trust somebody, you can accept their degrees, you can accept the credits gained at their institution, you can get into a partnership. You cannot know everybody. Knowing somebody, it's easy. If you don't know somebody, you need somebody outside who tells it's as good as if you knew them. Transparency is another, let's say, value of quality assurance. and in particular provision of transparent and independent information on quality of institutions and programs, and perhaps in some cases even higher education systems. We have looked at that at ENQA, and we are not sure if transparent always means accessible and easy to use. If you have 100-page reports that it takes you half an hour, takes me half an hour of Google search or internet search or website search to find the report, you can really question yourself. There's a technical transparency. It's there. You could theoretically find it. If you understand all the jargon, you could understand it. But in practice, that's really not the case. So we're working on that with the agencies as well, so that the quality assurance reports could remain useful for the institutions, to have a certain level of specificity and maybe also complication, but at the same time provide some kind of either summaries or structure that can be also captured by, let's say, normal, intelligent people, like I would think all of us are. This is also the last point there. It's very important. It's the conjunction of external and internal quality assurance. We cannot really have a well-functioning external quality assurance without good internal quality assurance. And internal quality assurance can be very strongly supported by the external quality assurance. So these two have to go together hand in hand, not fighting with each other too much, go hand in hand. The European standards and guidelines are split into 3 parts. So there's one on internal quality assurance, one on external quality assurance, so what the agency has to do towards the institution, and one on quality assurance of the agencies themselves. So that's the work that ENQA does towards the agencies. Again, internal evaluation is the cornerstone of everything, and the external evaluation is a kind of a credibility check of the results of the internal evaluation. And then also the agencies are accountable for the quality of their own activities, and that comes through the ENQA membership or registration in the European Quality Assurance Register. So all quality assurance agencies need to go through an external review every 5 years, so we check what they're actually up to. The European standards and guidelines are not really about quality. I mean, they are about quality, but they are really about the quality assurance and the processes. So they don't answer this often asked difficult question that we always joke about and never really have the courage to address: what is quality? They apply to all higher education offered in the European higher education area and by providers in the European higher education, whether it's delivered inside Europe or outside of Europe. And also independently of the mode of delivery. So it includes everything: e-learning, short courses, T&E, and also, we talked about that earlier, I cannot find, about the placements. So now the European standards and guidelines also mention placement that are integrated in the study program and how those also have to be included. They also apply to all types of quality assurance activities. I don't know if you are tremendously aware of that, but there is all kind of things between institutional audit, program evaluation, accreditation, etc. All of that is covered by the European standards and guidelines, which also, again, goes back to the diversity issue. So it's not an excuse to say, no, but we do things differently. We don't have to do it with the ESG way, but no, you have to do it the ESG way anyways. There is this dichotomy, there is this problematic relationship of enhancement and accountability that quality assurance in Europe tries to address. The question is, how can you put those two together? If you go there and check, you're the police, you're policing, how can you also support and help and give advice? Some say that cannot be put together. We believe it can, but it's complicated. We also want to address, say that even if you have an accreditation approach, so very much kind of accountability-focused approach, you can always integrate elements of enhancement, maybe through extra procedures, maybe through a label for quality, etc. Label for excellence, for example, and things like that. And it's a generic framework, so as I said. Some of the main changes, I'm just seeing whether that was designed for 5 minutes, but not yet, just a coffee. When we talk about standards and guidelines, people, what is a standard? What is guideline? What do you mean? Standard is the should. That's what everybody must really do. It's kind of defined as commonly accepted practice across Europe. Guidelines explain why the standard is important and give some suggestions of how things could be done under that standard. And we try to formulate them in the new version so that it wouldn't become a checklist. We don't want everybody to do everything exactly as it's said in the guidelines. We want them to do what is said in the standard. But how you do it, that's up to you. We can really see there is a lot more in the part 1, so in the institutional quality assurance, also to really take seriously the institutional primary responsibility for quality assurance. There are also a lot more guidelines, because we saw that it's not so obvious, not so easy to understand what you should do to comply with the given standard. There's also structural changes. We thought it's nice if it follows kind of the logical student life cycle. So you first design the programs, then you think about assessment. You first admit a student, then you think about the progression, credit accumulation, etc. So we try to follow a bit more logically the student and program life cycles. Just an example when we talk about the constant importance of constant enhancement. This is just a small example. Before we talk about quality assurance of teaching staff in the 2005 version. Now it says development of teaching staff, which means you don't check them once and for all and say, okay, that person is fine. And then 50 years on, you don't know what happens. But that there is a constant development. Flexible learning has really become very central. There is frequent reference to lifelong learning, to recognition of prior learning, different delivery modes, flexibility, diverse student body, and so on. And what is really the biggest novelty is the extreme focus on learning outcomes and student-centered learning. A student-centered learning and learning outcome-based approach are mentioned in 5 out of the 10 standards, and there is one specific new standard, standard 1.3, in case you are interested, on student-centered teaching, learning, and assessment. And this really requires, I think, again, in the UK, it's not so difficult. Even very many years ago, when I was a student in the UK, the teaching and learning was very student-centered. We had discussions, we had tutorials, we had seminars, we had essays, we presented to the other students and discussed things that in many European countries, you have to be aware of this, is not happening. There is a lecture room of 500 people, and the teacher speaks and disappears forever after. So it might be not such a challenge for you to comply with 1.3, but remember that have pity on your European colleagues and send them warm thoughts when you think, well, we've already done it all. But it does require a shift in thinking, what is quality? Is quality the teacher's curriculum and list of publications, or is quality in teaching and learning something different as well, perhaps? So it's a bit of a headache for quality assurance bureaus or quality assurance offices, and also for external quality assurance, how to deal with that. And how can you quantify student-centeredness? How can you measure that? And so if you have any good ideas, let me know. The part 2, this is a bit technical. This is one step removed from most of you. This is what the quality assurance agencies will have to think about when they come and check, wrong word, don't tell anybody, come and evaluate and support you in enhancement of quality. So there is some rearrangement. Standards move from part 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and 3 to 2, etc. But that's technical. There is some new focus. There is one on the peer review experts. Now, student participation is a requirement. Before, it wasn't a requirement. It was kind of a suggestion or good practice, but now it's a requirement for everybody. And although the QAA and the quality assurance in the UK has been really a kind of, I cannot say the best, but it's very compliant with the European standards and guidelines. There's one thing where it might face a little challenge, which is further internationalization of the system. So inclusion of international peers in the review panels, for example. And we did not manage, because of the opposition from this part of the world, to put that into the standard. So it's not a requirement, but it's a strong recommendation to involve international peers. Also in the report, like I say, there is a requirement to publish all full reports. And what I like is that before we talk about it, should be understandable for the intended readership. Who is the intended readership? I don't know. Everybody decides that for themselves. Now it has been clarified. Academic community, external partners, and other interested individuals. You could say that's not so much better. But I hope that we hope all that it makes agencies to think a little bit more about the reader that then gets this 100-page obscure language report and whether they can get something out of it or not. And then also complaints and appeals procedure are required for all kind of processes, not only those that lead to a legal decision. I skip part 3. It's not so interesting for you. That's my purpose of my life, but not yours. Just to summarize some key features, perfect, of quality assurance in Europe, like I said, diversity, and another thing, constant change. There's constant change because of external pressures, because of the world economy, migration, birth rates. All of this has an impact on higher education and thus to quality assurance. But also, agencies see it that if they come to you with the same questions time after time, it becomes a routine. It doesn't add any value and it doesn't, make you a bit nervous. I don't know what they are after. And what the quality assurance agencies should try to do always is to not make you nervous, but somehow to promote new thinking and to make you consider from a different point of view, different perspective, your own procedures and provision. I've said almost all of this already. Well, the international dimension really, it's increasingly expected in terms of use of expert, collaborative quality assurance. We are talking about that a lot. If you think about joint programs, you have a joint programs with 2 other institutions in 2 other countries. One has accreditation, one has institutional audit, one has evaluation at the program level. What do? Do you go through 3 procedures, 1 acceptance, etc.? So there is a lot of need for more international collaboration in that. Improvement of information and communication is absolutely fundamental. What we see also that agency's scope of activity has broadened. They do also a lot of more, because of the enhancement focus, a lot more consultancy type of activity, but in a kind of positive consultancy, not kind of just to make some money, which also can help. And also cross-border activities are coming to the forefront. But national regulations still drive the process. We have a common framework, and we accept and we expect agencies and institutions to think about their own processes, that they are compliant with the European standards and guidelines, but also fit their own framework. But what we have to be careful about is to see when local adaptations are actually related to quality and to the system, and when they are simply traditions. We have countries that come and say, look, in our country, involving students in a review panel, it's not really, the professors wouldn't accept it. But that's a tradition. That's not a good argument to say it's different in our country. So we have to make that difference. There is a challenge about recognition of quality assurance decisions and also foreign qualifications. There is an issue and question about the impact of quality assurance. We believe that it improves quality down to the last level, the most important level, which is the student, but it's difficult to detect that. We have a challenge with involvement of employers. We consider them as important partners in the quality assurance processes, but they are not always so interested in getting involved. And then there is a challenge of quality assurance of cross-border higher education, but that is something that, because you are the experts on that, I leave for you to discuss. I would just like to say that we are organizing a conference on quality assurance of cross-border higher education in November in Paris. So in case you are interested, and with the permission of the organizers, I leave some small leaflet of that event on a table outside. So if you are interested, you could come and join us on that occasion. And that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much.